right, seems like the numbers have slowed down for people joining, so we'll go ahead and close that poll now, and we'll get into it. Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. Welcome to today's webinar, defining what it means to be a best workplace. My name is Madison Kamek. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior customer success manager here at AllVoices. So this webinar is hosted by AllVoices. For any folks who aren't familiar with us, AllVoices is an employee intelligence platform to systematically ask for, accept, analyze, and act on feedback of all kinds. You'll find good ideas and bad habits in real time, reducing turnover and recruiting costs. So what makes a best workplace? We know that a few key ingredients are radical flexibility and employees feeling like they belong in an equitable work environment where their work really matters. A few stats that illustrate this include the adoption of radical flexibility raises the number of employees defined as high performing by 40%. 41% of people have left their job in 2021 because they didn't feel listened to. And lastly, 39% of employees say that when colleagues check in both personally and professionally, they have a greater sense of belonging at work. So let's jump into it and meet these wonderful panelists that we have here. Would love for everyone to start with an introduction. So introduce yourself, include your name, your pronouns, your role, the work you do at your company, and what has recently brought you joy. So let's start with Maceo.
Yes, thank you for the intro. I'm Maceo, everyone, pronouns she, her, located in Detroit, Michigan. And I lead the ERG program at Open Table and Kayak. If you know me, you know that I am ERG obsessed. And I think something that has recently brought me joy would be last week I celebrated my 5th year anniversary with my husband. So yes, that's my fun fact.
Awesome. Let's go to Casey next.
Hi everyone, my name is Casey Strawn Cornelius. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I currently serve as the Director of Human Resources at InfoTrend Inc. Within my role, I really oversee all of the traditional and functional areas of the Human Resources Department. But I will say my personal kind of favorite and focus is working on strategic initiatives that enhance and really further the employee experience and looking at employee engagement. And I will say, actually last week I had an opportunity to have one-to-one, we call them coffee conversations with one of our teams. And it was just so nice to be able to connect with everyone. It honestly felt like we were back in the, quote unquote, old days where, we'd be seeing each other face to face. I got a ton of feedback. And again, that connection was just so wonderful. So that was just really fantastic. And again, thank you for having me today.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll go to Levi and then Megan.
Hi, I'm Levi, and I am a transmasculine person. I use they, them pronouns, and I have been a people leader for 14 years and really love the work, and excited to be here with AllVoices and all of you. And what has brought me joy is I'm currently house sitting for a cousin of mine who has many creatures, several cats. There's a gecko, there's a dog, and I have 2 kids, and they're here, and so they're just in heaven. And so it's just fun to like be in a different place and hanging out with some animals. They're so awesome. So that's been really joyful these last couple days.
Awesome. And my name's Megan, everyone. So nice to meet you. Thanks to AllVoices for having me, and just thanks to everyone who decided to join today. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a people and talent lead at Shopify, fairly new addition to the team. Prior to that, I was running the people team for the Americas region of a consulting firm. And let's see, what has been bringing me joy these days? I am spending most of the year in Brazil with my fiance and her family. And it's been just a kind of an unexpected adventure to be here, but having the time to get to know where she came from and her friends has just been amazing. So that's been really exciting this year.
How cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Really excited to dig into this conversation. So let's get started. So first, would love to kind of understand, what the full employee means. So Casey, would love to start with you. How do you ensure that employees feel seen, heard, and understood? And that's kept general on purpose.
Yep. So I will say at InfoTrend, we definitely look at our workforce being very holistic and very diverse. So with that being said, I think really have to employ several different methods, right? Different methods reach different employees. They engage with different employees, right? Speak with them in different ways. So, I think being very diverse in your approach here will do well. Additionally, I think, having a culture that's very open, very collaborative, and I would say almost conversational in a sense, it is really, I would argue, the way of the future within this arena. We have seen a lot of organizations, unfortunately, who employ maybe just an annual employee engagement survey or employee satisfaction survey. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. We do that as well. But the fact of the matter is, if you're only having one survey a year or one conversation a year with folks, that's not enough to keep them engaged and keep them tied to your organization. So again, it's really about being repetitive and diverse. And I would also argue getting multiple levels of your organization involved. Okay. It can't just fall to HR to meet the needs of everyone in your organization, right? You have to have a very strong management team who's doing this, I would say, on almost a daily basis, touching base with their team. You have to have a very engaged leadership team. And again, for us at InfoTrend, we expand that to everyone in our company and say, hey, you don't have to be a director or vice president to have these conversations. If you want to connect with a colleague, schedule 10 or 15 minutes on their calendar, have that conversation. It's going to be positive for you, it's going to be positive for them. So then when you have all of those layers and different areas that you're engaging with employees, I think you net a lot more positive outcomes.
I love that. That's awesome. Megan, what are your kind of thoughts on that and any ideas that you have too?
Yeah, I firstly just completely agree, Casey, with everything you said. And you use the word engagement. I think that's a key one for me, and also empowerment. But how we make people, how I would say make people feel seen and heard, or I try to at least, is to engage personally and empower professionally. I think if you get to know somebody on a personal level and understand how they're coming into their role, what's important to them, you can help find motivating factors within the professional world and use that to then empower them to get involved in things that maybe they're outside of their core roles, but they're something they're interested in. Maybe it's encouraging them to partner with another employee whose opportunity for development is their strength. And so you're kind of creating new partnerships that might not in the kind of a traditional sense make the most sense, but in a new way of working, they make the most sense. So engagement and empowerment, I think that's how these days it's so important. And we do, as leaders and as team members, I think have to go above and beyond to make this happen in the remote sense, because it doesn't happen quite as organically. But it's also, by making an effort, I think brought at least a lot of my team members closer together. We know each other even more personally now than I think we would have if it was a traditional office environment.
I love that. That's really cool. I think a lot of kind of the last few years, we've had to kind of redefine a lot of things. And so kind of thinking about that, redefining what, quote unquote, best looks like as a best workplace. Maceo, I'd love to hear from you on kind of how you have redefined employee engagement and what a best workplace looks like in the last few years?
Yeah, I'll definitely say the main focus for me was implementing metrics, which typically the people team, HR team is not known for, I guess, implementing, especially hard quantitative data. And it meshes typically very well with the qualitative feedback that you would get in a survey or even by having that open feedback culture that Casey spoke about. And that being said, best also looks different depending on the organization. So in order, my opinion, to get to best, you have to understand where you're currently sitting at, and strive for better. So that's where the data comes in. A few things that I think were interesting to look at when it comes to the data, would be one, after you define engagement, there's actually like negative forms of engagement. Like maybe an employee is working way after hours, and that's a hard data piece that you can actually see, like when employees are working. Negative engagement, because eventually that employee or that set of employees, sometimes you might even find that it's a team that has kind of a habit of doing that. They're the ones who are going to be burnt out and who are going to be less engaged in the things that you want them to be engaged with. So you can look at hard metrics like that, or even when it comes to events or initiatives that you're throwing, beyond just seeing how many people are participating, seeing what departments are more likely to participate, maybe even breaking it down by tenure. That'll help tell a story. And that's something that I love about data. Like I said, it matches with what you see qualitatively, and it tells you what the next steps should be. And once again, it looks different for every company, even depending on what systems you use. So Zoom versus Teams versus Google Meet, Slack versus Teams, all these different things. I think something that's really important is just understanding what is measurable in the systems that you currently use, and then just asking the right questions around employee engagement there. And from there, it just helps you better define where you want to be as an organization in the future.
Love that. That's awesome. So kind of thinking about radical flexibility as one of those things that I mentioned in those statistics, and how that's so important these days. Megan, what role does radical flexibility play in your company culture?
A huge role, actually. So I think post-pandemic, Shopify, very soon after lockdown happened in 2020, I think maybe 2 months in, Shopify was one of the first businesses to just make the choice to go completely digital by design. And this was well before I joined, obviously, but it was a conscious choice by the leadership to say business can continue based on the comfort of our employees, which are our most important asset. And so we decided to adopt a fully remote culture. It was a phased plan, as I've heard since I've joined, that included, a ton of employee feedback, first starting with, how do you feel about this? If we were to make the decision to make this permanent, what would we need to do as a business to make you comfortable with this? Because even though it's become the norm for us now these days, at the time, that certainly wasn't the culture for Shopify. It wasn't the culture for the business I was working in at the time either. And what I love about the approach, and is still very evident in what we do today, is the level of employee feedback that we're constantly seeking while we're doing this. And we've kind of adopted right from the beginning this mindset of, we're going to be radically flexible, and we really want to know what that means to you, because the only way we're radically flexible is if we understand, how we need to be flexible for each individual. It might not look the same for everyone. So how do we come up with this formula that works collectively, and how do we feel about it? And we've been open about the fact that it's kind of a work in progress, and there's going to be things that feel really comfortable and work well, and other rollouts that don't work as well as they would have if we were in person. One of the things that the business has rolled out in the last several years, which is super exciting and just a ton of fun to be a part of, is what the business called bursts, where every 6 months we'll bring certain teams together and get to spend a couple of days working business as usual, but alongside each other in person. And that has helped to, continue to establish connections that, again, don't happen quite as organically just over a video. But we also make sure that in the beginning of every meeting, at least within the teams that I work closely with, we're asking how people are feeling, how they're coming into the meeting. Like, what's going on in your personal life today? Are you super excited? Are you having a bad day? Are you not feeling the best? Because it's our feeling that as leaders and as a business, if we can adapt what our expectations are based on what's going on in our employees' lives, they'll be much more willing to work towards the deliverables that we've asked them to do, and much more productive in the way that they do them. And the stats are just absolutely reiterating that. So it's a lot of conversation back and forth with the team. What's flexible to you, and how as a business can we support that?
Yeah, so important to kind of bring in the human aspect at work, and then kind of remind your employees that they're human and can feel things outside the workplace, and that's going to affect them. So love that you're all doing that. Levi, from your experience, how do you think about creating non-negotiables for an ideal workplace in terms of flexibility and transparency?
Yeah, I guess, again, a pretty broad question. So help direct me if I'm going off in an unknown, anyways, you know what I mean. Depends on the non-negotiable, I mean, a non-negotiable around certain types of behavior. I think it's okay to have things that are non-negotiable, tolerating violence or, certain types of behavior. I think it's important to actually create behavioral expectations and then stick to it. That's where it really comes down to building that trust with folks around what is negotiable and what is really non-negotiable. Is you got to follow through with, the company has to follow through with what it says it's going to do in those situations. So from that perspective, from like the employee engagement perspective, I do think it's okay to create non-negotiables. More information is always better. So the more a company can paint the picture of success, and even if that means saying what isn't success, like being trustworthy looks like this in this company, not being a trustworthy person looks like this in this company, really helps people understand what is non-negotiable in the company. And I think that really helps. And a lot of times we, say things like, we want you to have, experience joy at this workplace, but then we don't define what joy is at this workplace. And I think that then it becomes the employee's responsibility to figure it out. And that is impossible if, we all have, like, we just answered this question, what has brought us joy recently, and we all have different answers, and so that's exactly the same thing that'll happen in an organization. So non-negotiables, negotiables, anything, any expectation needs to be clearly discussed as much as possible. And when you find out, maybe you don't have something that is clarified, but you learn that you need to have to clarify something, then clarify it, take the step to do that. And I'm okay with non-negotiables in terms of, as a business, we need to hit a goal and the deadline is non-negotiable. That makes a ton of sense to me. Then support your teams to get to that deadline. That's where I think it should be a negotiation between teams, how they want to work to meet the deadline, but maybe the deadline is non-negotiable. I mean, I think that's a easier place to land non-negotiables. There are some places too, I'll just last point, on we were just talking about this before, on unlimited paid time off is such a wonderful, radically flexible benefit, unless it's not managed well in the company. And so, I guess I would pose the question, is it possible to create a non-negotiable around taking some of that time, holding, maybe this is an HR and people team responsibility to find out who isn't taking any time and hold them accountable to taking time off. Within a 6-month or a year period, you have not taken more than 24 hours off, you must take that time off. And then maybe that's showing up, maybe not holding, a raise or promotion from somebody because of it, but maybe it becomes part of a review process that they're not taking the time they need to then show back up to work and be that much more engaged.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Something we have to constantly kind of look at. The thought is unlimited PTO, that gives everyone unlimited time, but you have to continue to check in, see how it's working, and make sure that people are utilizing it.
Yep.
So kind of thinking about equity at work now. Maceo, Casey, I'd love to hear from you and everyone as well if you want to jump in. But how does equity show up at your workplace? And would love to hear some specific examples.
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind. Obviously, I'm going to plug ERGs, employee resource groups. If your company doesn't have them, that's what it stands for, where there are these inclusive communities, typically around an underrepresented or marginalized group. So that's an obvious way that by providing resources to these employees, that's a huge way that we're promoting equity. But I also think how we're approaching our ERG program and even like our employee programs in general is interesting, specifically regarding hourly employees, which are oftentimes overlooked. And honestly, for me, it's a pain point, not a pain point, but it's something that's really of interest to me because not long ago, I was an hourly employee at a big tech company. And I didn't know about what was going on at a quote unquote corporate level. Even though we were all accessible via Slack, I was like, I can't reach out to them. And I didn't know how to bridge that gap. And the one day that I did find out about ERGs, it just happened to be by accident. And since then, now that I'm in the work that I'm doing, the questions are, is the information accessible to everyone? And while I'm speaking right now in terms of hourly employees, that obviously applies to like actual physical accessibility issues that may be present in your websites and like in your Slack communication process, things like that. Also, how is the information being then promoted? Oftentimes when it comes down to a certain level, like the mid-level manager space, that's where a lot of these like employee initiatives can start to not be promoted like that, or it may even be discouraged from employees participating, believe it or not, maybe around some concern that like production is going to go down or what have you. But honestly, it may not be promoted like you may feel it is. So after you understand these different community groups that may be missing out on the information, really digging into the process and having those like conversations, that's been big for me in terms of understanding like, is it as equitable as I previously thought? And sometimes it does take an extra step. And that's once again what I appreciate about our programs, because we do take that extra step of working with workforce management weeks in advance so that, for instance, hourly employees will be able to take the time off to participate, or that we have something set. This way they're able to actually participate in these events. So that's one of my favorite examples of equity.
And Masio, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and really experience working with the ERGs. I think that's fantastic. I'll take the question, I suppose, and maybe a different direction, but I think at least at Infotrend, the way that we see equity show up a lot is through fairness, consistency, and I would say most importantly, transparency within our workforce. So a very easy example or item that we do is even regarding compensation. We use various matrices that are based on education experience, and because we work as government contractors, we have something called labor categories that are specified, excuse me, by the federal government to help guide those. So, if there's ever any questions or anything, I think sometimes being able to provide that I'll use the term evidence to folks, I think that creates so much goodwill. And again, that transparency just ensures that that equity is there.
Love that. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I see questions are coming in. That's fantastic. Keep those coming, everyone. And we'll leave time at the end to make sure we get to all those. But looking kind of ahead here at employee feedback, Levi, I'd love to hear from you. How do you leverage employee feedback in your people and culture strategy? And how has it informed kind of past decisions and changes?
Yeah, sure. The feedback that a company receives, that I've received, is only, it's a real opportunity to build trust again. So I think there is a need to take better care of the feedback. I think just in terms of follow through, and I think that's just a matter of learning what follow through means at your company. And if you're providing a mechanism for feedback, there's several different ways to do that. And I think they all really need to be in place. There's the, anonymous version. I even read about a company who used to have a 1-800 number where you could call and anonymously leave a message. The hard part is if somebody knows your voice, but hopefully there's trust in the company, and whoever's listening is not going to break that trust. I do think sometimes the non-anonymous, the very upfront and feedback is really important too, because it attaches that human name to that feedback. And so I think feedback is just so critical, and the more ongoing and day-to-day it is, the better, because then it becomes just embedded in the culture of the company. And then I think that's when using it and then following up on that feedback actually gets easier, because then you're not trying to collect feedback. If the only time you're collecting feedback is in a survey, this is through experience, twice a year, there's so much there you're not going to be able to do. You got to pick the most the thing that's on fire, to deal with. And then there are all these other things that actually are about to become on fire, but you can't get to them because you've now created this big bank of feedback that you have to figure out what to do. And I think that, I don't want anyone to stop, getting feedback, looking for feedback, and finding ways to use that feedback better. I just think there's a little more care that needs to be taken. And in my experience, I think there is a challenge with, I'll say, the leadership. And I think this again is where feedback can actually work really well, is if leadership, executive team, whoever's on leadership team, directors, senior directors, whoever those folks that make up that team are bought in wholeheartedly to the collecting feedback and following through on feedback. If it drops, if any one of the leaders is iffy about it or doesn't, request that their team fill out the survey or answer the question or show up to the meeting, I think then it starts to lose credibility. And again, that's where then trust will break down. And then you have a whole slew of other problems in addition to nobody cares about the feedback I give anyways, right? That's a killer for culture and, motivation. And these programs around radical flexibility will fall apart too if the trust isn't there. So I've used the feedback and really if it's anonymous, I've gone to an all team company, weekly meeting and read a few of the pieces of feedback in the anonymous survey. And then I would resend out the survey every week. If it was not anonymous, I would never speak for somebody else unless they wanted me to. So sometimes I would see a piece of feedback that was connected to a person, and I would go direct to them and say, is this something you think a lot of people are feeling or seeing? Should we, talk about this at a team meeting or in another way? Just get permission from somebody who's, I don't care if it's anonymous or not. I always like to get permission from the person who's who's trusted, at least if I'm the person looking, they've trusted me to do the right thing, and take care of their voice. But so yeah, feedback is really an amazing thing when there's that psychological safety, that real foundation of, I am not just, it's not just the quality of my work that is expected and where I get good pats on the back and like a yay, good job, but it's also when I dissent, I'm protected, I'm welcome, my dissent is welcome. It's actually part of our culture. Or if I'm learning and I don't get it right, I can trust that that folks know that, and that they're going to trust that I'm going to get there, and that so I think, again, like all these pieces are all tied together. You can't really separate feedback from radical flexibility or non-negotiables, or that's why I love this conversation, because it's such a connected ecosystem.
Yeah, love that. We at AllVoices love everything you just said, and think the same way about making sure executives are really sponsoring that feedback and encouraging feedback. That's obviously huge. So I love that you kind of called that out and are really taking care of that feedback, because that's kind of the most important thing. So now kind of thinking about employees getting involved outside of the people and HR departments, Maceo, would love to hear how you think employees can get involved and really raise their hand to be extra culture champions. And also on that, we had a similar question in the chat that I wanted to throw in as kind of a second part to that question. How are your organizations addressing compensation, recognition, or rewards for ERG leadership? So kind of mixing all those together.
Yes. So for the first part, obviously I'm going to plug ERGs. I mean, by participating, you don't have to, not only do you not have to be part of the people team to participate or to lead one, but actually kind of prefer it that way in many cases, that we get a good representation of the entire company in these employee resource groups. And if your company doesn't have them, or even if you're a small company, that's something that you can look to starting. I've seen companies with fewer than 100 employees have just small community groups. It doesn't have to be a fully baked out program, but just providing space for employees that have like similar backgrounds to speak, like that's a big piece in of itself. That being said, in addition to ERGs as a whole, easy small lifts would be cultural celebrations that maybe your organization currently doesn't recognize, or maybe just doesn't have the insight on how to recognize. For instance, like I have very little context on like Diwali, for instance, but it is a significant cultural holiday. So if that is something that resonates with you and your culture, you can easily just raise your hand and volunteer to educate people, or even give some ideas around programming. So see a need, fill a need. And in many cases, you might be the first person who's really pushing this cultural change in terms of like building this best workplace and making that a priority. But I don't know if you all saw the video on YouTube. It's an older one, but like there's one person who's dancing by themselves. And then all of a sudden other people are like, hey, I think I want to dance too. And eventually it's a whole big group of like hundreds of people dancing. It's similar to that, in that by you raising your hand, you're almost giving permission to other people to participate. On the second piece of that question, when it comes to ERG leadership and recognition and whatnot, a few things. Obviously, compensation is ideal, but let's say that hypothetically that's not on the table, because some organizations it's not. Budget can be small. There are other forms of recognition, which include one, like just FaceTime with executives. A lot of people really prioritize that. I once again throw back to when I was a support employee, but I was a co-chair for an ERG. Never in my life would I have imagined like speaking to the CEO or the chief technology officer, but I got those opportunities, and that alone, at that organization I was at the time, they did not pay their ERG leaders, but that was so valuable for me. And it really did translate to a lot of my transitions in my career that I've had since then. Or even mentorship programs are things that you can stand up. maybe even just like investing in getting the ERG leads together physically if you are a remote first company every now and then. Those are some other ways that you can compensate ERG leaders and recognize them. But even when it comes to ERG leader recognition or even employee recognition, just understanding love languages. Funny enough, there's a book, I can't remember which one, but and it talked about like love languages in the workplace and how that translates. And not everyone wants to be recognized the same way. Some people would prefer monetary or like a gift, but some people an experience is more important to them. Some people recognition like verbally or a shout out, but to some people that might be terrible. Like some people really hate those type of shout outs in public forums. So even just asking people sometimes doesn't hurt, and just understanding what the best form of recognition is for them. That's like similar to that radically flexible piece that we touched on earlier, and just being flexible in how you recognize people and being able to meet them with what they want.
Love that. Thank you for sharing your expertise on that. And hopefully that helped answer your question, who put that in the chat. In terms of effective company communication, because that's also a really key part of this. Casey, Levi, and everyone else, can you give an example of what effective company communication looks like?
So I would argue that effective company communication really has three distinct components most of the time. One, proactivity. I think that should be the rule, and being reactive should be the exception. Unfortunately, there's lots of organizations where that's flipped around. Secondly, and thirdly, I suppose, comes transparency and compassion. Okay, so regardless of the communication that's going out, right, whether it's a positive communication, say, hey, we're announcing a new, learning platform, right, that we're introducing, right, that's a positive thing. However, we still need to let folks know what's happening ahead of time, so they, can let it absorb, and again, just be in the know, be connected. But we also have to think about it. Are there going to be any type of anxiety or trepidation with even a positive announcement, right? And you try to get out in front of that, and maybe, hey, here's some, training videos or, more materials if you're interested in learning a little bit more, just to prepare them. Likewise, especially if, maybe the message is not positive or as positive as that, right? Sometimes the message is a little bit difficult. Again, having that empathy and realizing the impact that you could potentially have on folks. I think that becomes really the definition of effective communication.
Yeah, Casey, love that. Such a fan of preparation and being proactive. And the truth about that is that there are surprises and there are things that happen, but there's always time to get a communication strategy or plan down. I think in certain situations, if they're really, really urgent, then all the leaders, like the leadership team, needs to know that there are times when your CEO or COO or whoever is going to call and say, hey, we've got a situation, we need to come up with a plan in the next 15 minutes. Well, hey, that's an urgent matter, but you can still do it. And when you do that, you end up not putting your foot in your mouth as much as you do when you just go in unprepared. But sometimes it's important to put your foot in your mouth because you learn from that. And sometimes you don't have time. I find that, though, you really think about it and pay attention, those times are few and far between. And the communication cadence, the building, and this I think involves the entire leadership team, and I don't think it's just on the HR and people team, building a structure and then using that structure and bending it and making it flexible where it needs to be for certain, for each individual case, but building a structure of you're hiring a new person, what's the comms cadence for that. You're letting somebody go. What is the communication strategy for that? Or, God forbid there's a death in the company and you got to come up with a way to communicate about that. Or there's something happening in the world that is really, pretty horrible. I mean, and you should say something, but you don't want to say something that then is going to alienate a group of people that are already alienated in our culture and our society. I think, yes, like creating a structure ahead of time, then you can use that structure, then you can mold that structure a little bit. But if you don't have it, yeah, you're flying solo with a large group of people. When you're communicating, even great stuff, can be challenging. And having, the leadership team with, hopefully there's an HR people person on that leadership team. And if not, then those leaders need to invite the people folks in so that we can ask the questions like, will this, this particular comment sounds, difficult for certain people to hear. Let's change it. Why would we say that? I think we as people leaders do need to stand up and ask those questions. And then it's, the responsibility of the leaders to listen and be willing to be changed by what they're hearing and what we're asking. But really you literally can make a chart and make a plan. It's and there are books, there are systems, there are ways to do this. You don't have to completely make it up on your own if you're not sure what to do, but it's incredibly important how we communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those were some great points. Love that. So we have 15 minutes left. I'm thinking of answering some of these questions in the Q&A here, and then whatever we have left, we can wrap up with a couple other questions that I have. But to make sure we get to these, one person has asked, can you talk about empathy as a workplace superpower? I'm considering focusing on empathy to assist us in creating an inclusive workplace. What are your thoughts? How are you teaching empathy at work?
Macy, go.
Anyone, go for it. Yeah.
I was going to say this was something that was brought to my attention too at my last organization. And ever since then, understanding the design thinking process, I think is what really helped me bake empathy into my personal process whenever it comes to standing up a new program or launching a new initiative. With design thinking, just a quick overview, it really starts off with understanding the problem itself. And with that, that's where the empathy piece comes in, where you have to ask questions and you have to understand people's experience outside your own, especially on the people team or the HR team. Oftentimes we can be in our own world where we're like, obviously, you know what ERGs are, obviously, you know what our benefits are, but it's really not that obvious. So I would say really learning about design thinking and understanding the questions that you can ask. And something that I really love doing is a listening tour where I'm just taking a day or two, and yeah, it's back-to-back Zoom calls, but I'm asking everyone the same questions and I'm really getting a good idea. People from different levels, from different backgrounds, different roles, and understanding what their current experience is, where the gaps are. And even once I do have an idea, I'll still go back to those same people and say, does this fit your need? Does this fit what we were speaking about earlier? So that's empathy is definitely a superpower, in my opinion, that it takes a lot for you to even want to get uncomfortable and say what I think is best, or what I think is normal is not normal, and try to understand and improve that for others.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Love everything you said so much. I think this again, I'll go to define it. I think what you just said about not everybody, knows, I think not everybody knows what empathy actually looks like, maybe even means, and defining it. And I mean, there are plenty of definitions out there and plenty of books from, Dr. Brene Brown to, Adam Grant to Kim Scott. Like, everybody talks about empathy. And I do think the push from a lot of those folks is to define it. And I've learned over the years that, yeah, if common sense were actually common, then people would know it. And so when we say like, it's just common sense, it is that way of turning what that person doesn't know and kind of shaming them for it. And so I just never think anything is common sense. It is my job to tell you what the expectation is, because if I don't, then I'm not sure how to, I don't think it's fair for me to expect you to do it without knowing what I want, because I'm a unique, individual who sees it differently. And so if there's an expectation at the company, and I've done this when I worked for Blue Bottle Coffee for a decade and was training baristas and managers, like everyone was everyone's customer in the company, inside the company, and then outside the company, yes, those are customers too. And so what does an empathetic customer service program look like? And we would role play different scenarios, and we would talk through like, what it's, I would give examples. This is what it sounds like. This is the body language of empathy. These are some words you can use. These are the actions that later that that shows the empathy because you followed up and you followed through. And so I think it's just like, it is a superpower, but harness it and yeah, talk about it, define it. And one size fits one. It's not a one size fits all. Empathy is not one size fits all kind of a program or superpower in a company.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points there. Thank you both for answering that. We had one other question in here that Casey kind of gave a really great answer directly, but thought I would kind of raise it in case anyone else had a similar question. But this person mentioned that they appreciate the insights from various workplaces, but seems to me that the companies you work for are large. What's the best advice to create a best place to work from the get-go as a small growing startup? Also having created a great culture whilst you're little, how do you safeguard it when you scale up? Casey gave some great points about ensuring leadership management, all levels of the organization are of that culture, but would love to open it up to everyone else and give your insight too.
I primarily have worked for small companies, early stage startups, being like the 7th person hired or the 12th person hired. Like, yeah, I think that it's a great place to lay that foundation. It is harder. From what I've learned, it is harder when a company is larger. If those things aren't in place and leaders aren't trained in the beginning to, or hired for and then trained to perform empathy and radical flexibility and understanding what that means and inclusion. And then I do think it's harder at 1,000 people, 2,000 people to turn that boat around. It's painful, it's costly, it hurts people and it hurts the company. And so laying those foundations early is incredibly important. And it's hard. Startups are hard to do that with. It. Money is always an issue. Speed is not. It's nonstop. But as people leaders, it is our job to at least call it out and to say, the speed of this initiative equals the deterioration of one of our values. Are we actually going to do that? So like early people leaders have to, or in early startups, I think have to hold the leadership accountable. And it is challenging, but keep at it and, start with just a couple of things and create some initiatives and just, go for it. Don't wait till it's a perfect program. Don't wait till everybody is in 100% agreement. That never happens. Really talk to the CEO, COO, whoever you feel like is at the top of decision making, because those are the people. They're gonna, if they're not with it, and with that empathetic leadership style or bought into those expectations and those behavioral expectations, it is harder. It is harder to get that done.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for those thoughts. So I'd now love to kind of just hear from everyone. I think we can start with Megan. But what is your now call to action? So to all the folks here, what is your call to action to actively cultivate a best place to work? And this can be for leaders, teammates, everyone.
It's a great question. I've had this theme in my head actually for some of these questions already that have come up. I think the call to action for everyone here is it falls under the larger umbrella of managing upward, I think, which is a controversial term because I don't necessarily mean that leaders are putting more expectation on their employees to handle a problem themselves. But I do think that in this day and age, while a lot of business in general and culture is changing from historical traditions that are super outdated and need to change, there is a heavier reliance on employees to speak up and to share feedback, share their own experiences so that the leaders can respond. And it has to be a trickle-down effect. Obviously, we do want leaders who are bought in, and that makes it so much easier. But we talked a little bit about corporate communications and making that really effective. I think one of the things that's just true in most corporations, whether they're small or large, is that most of the employees in the organization have a leader, right? There's usually only one CEO, and then most of the other employees have a boss. One of the things that I've found really effective over my career, and I've worked for very small companies, and now Shopify is the largest company I've worked for, but is asking my leaders, if you were receiving this message from your boss, or if your boss was having a conversation with you, how would you want them to be sharing this information? And the same themes come up every single time. It's spot on what I think Casey was saying about transparency, inspiring confidence. So even if you're delivering a message that's not the best, being clear about what the plan is to resolve it. And I think your employees will always respect that. And the same exact thing comes into feedback. I mean, feedback from a survey standpoint doesn't make sense without accountability. So we need to be asking these questions individually with every single person on our team, as leaders and as employees, asking those same questions of our leaders and sharing our thoughts with our leaders. So I think the more comfortable we are to kind of share where we're coming from and be open about some of these things, the easier the organization will be able to kind of shift accordingly. So the call to action, speak up.
Love that. Macia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think mine, besides joining an ERG, surprise, surprise. But in addition to that, though, I would say get connected with people and make it a goal, like 5 people a month even, just to reach out to, just for a coffee chat. You want to learn more about their role. You can randomize it, like whoever you're going to pick, but definitely just meet more people. And that is going to drive that culture, which I think you touched on at the beginning, Madison, where you're saying people like to be reached out. It doesn't have to be a professional reach out or touch base. It can be like just a personal check-in, but that can happen more, but someone has to be the person to kind of start that piece. So definitely just make it a goal to get more connected with people in your current organization.
Levi, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I am like this panel right here is, you all have said some amazing things and you have great experience. And I think the thing we all, hopefully, I can ask you all to everybody who's listening and watching, to realize that you don't have to do it alone. And that, now there's even this group of people that you can reach out to and ask for help, because if you've never started, if there's never been an ERG at your company, I have a feeling that, Maceo is interested, will help you or give you some pointers even, because one thing that the call to action, like, aside from what Megan and Maceo and Casey have already, talked about today, I think it is, we have to call our leaders to action to resource our teams. This is hard work that cannot be done with a small team. I mean, ERGs take energy, equitable compensation, promotions and rewards take energy. Recruiting is, is an unbelievable amount of energy to do it, and to do it with a, diverse and inclusive lens. And, setting up metrics and collecting data and analyzing that data and then turning that into action takes a lot of energy. And I think that the unfortunate history of HR is that it's sort of seen, as at the bottom of the list of priorities, unfortunately, which it really should be flipped, if we think about it. And I think that's what this time period we're going through is trying to tell everyone who's in a power position. Employees are saying, you got to invest more in us and we'll give you everything we got. That's what we want. We want to give you everything we got. Everybody wants to feel proud of what they're doing. Everybody wants to be acknowledged for it. And that takes a team of people to create wonderful people programs to make a great place to work. And so action, call on your network to help you out. And then, let's, as a group of people leaders, join together to ask the leadership team at the top to resource us better.
Awesome. Casey, final thoughts.
So I would say my call to action is very simple. Again, I seem to take everything back to culture, but know your culture, understand your culture, and don't be afraid to kind of take the culture bull by the horns, if you will, and lead yourself in certain cases, or become a leader for others. Don't wait for the very top to take action. If you're seeing something, keep speaking up, keep providing feedback, but don't be afraid to get your hands dirty either.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much, panelists, for your amazing conversation, your thoughts, your expertise. I know that I took a lot away from this conversation, so I hope everyone else did too. Everyone, if you have questions, want to reach out to any of the panelists, you have their LinkedIns, their information. Also, feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the AllVoices team. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.